Good Sunday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading. Today is March the 12th, and we are reading together in Exodus chapter 34. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I appreciate taking the time to read along with me to start out this Lord's Day together. We're going to be looking here at the final outcome, I guess the fallout from the golden calf incident. Certainly did not look good. In chapter 32, it looked as if Yahweh was going to just wipe them out and start all over again with Moses. Moses intercedes for them, and the Lord relents. It seems to be as if things are going to go a little bit better. And eventually here in chapter 34, we're going to see the covenant renewed with Israel. And we're going to see how Moses plays a very, very vital and key role in this taking place. Again, thanks so much for tuning in today. Hope that your weekend has gone well. Really excited for a great Lord's Day together today, as we have our usual Bible classes at 10 o'clock and our worship assembly at 11. I'm especially excited, though, for our young people's class that's going to take place at our house following that. But again, let's get to our reading to start off the day here in Exodus chapter 34 and verse number 1. Exodus 34, verse number 1, Yahweh said to Moses, "Cut 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and I will write on them the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke. Be prepared by morning, come up to Mount Sinai in the morning, and stand before me on the mountain. No one may go up with you. In fact, no one should be seen anywhere on the mountain. Even the flocks and the herds are not to graze in front of that mountain." Moses cut 2 stone tablets like the first ones. He got up early in the morning, and taking the 2 stone tablets in his hand, he climbed Mount Sinai just as Yahweh had commanded him. Yahweh came down in a cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed his name, Yahweh. Yahweh passed in front of him and proclaimed, Yahweh. Yahweh is a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger and abounding in faithful love and truth, maintaining faithful love to 1,000 generations, forgiving iniquity, rebellion, and sin. But he will not leave the guilty unpunished, bringing the consequences of the father's iniquity on the children and grandchildren to the 3rd and 4th generation. Moses immediately knelt low on the ground and worshipped. Then he said, "My Lord, if I have indeed found favor with you, my Lord, please go with us, even though this is a stiff-necked people. Forgive our iniquity and our sin, and accept us as your own possession." And Yahweh responded, "Look, I am making a covenant in the presence of all your people. I will perform wonders that have never been done in the whole earth or in any nation. All the people you live among will see Yahweh's work, for what I am doing with you is awe-inspiring. Observe what I commanded you today. I'm going to drive out before you the Amorites, Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Be careful not to make a treaty with the inhabitants of the land that you are going to enter, otherwise they will become a snare among you. Instead, you must tear down their altars, smash their sacred pillars, and chop down their Asherah poles. Because Yahweh is jealous for his reputation, you are never to bow down to another god. He is a jealous God. Do not make a treaty with the inhabitants of the land, or else when they prostitute themselves with their gods and sacrifice to their gods, they will invite you, and you will eat their sacrifices. Then you will take some of their daughters as brides for your sons. Their daughters will prostitute themselves with their gods and cause your sons to prostitute themselves with their gods. Do not make cast images of gods for yourselves." Verse 18, observe the festival of unleavened bread. You are to eat unleavened bread for 7 days at the appointed time in the month of Abib, as I commanded you, for you came out of Egypt in the month of Abib. The firstborn male from every womb belongs to me, including all your male livestock, the firstborn of cattle or sheep. You may redeem the firstborn of a donkey with the sheep, but if you do not redeem it, break its neck. You must redeem all the firstborn of your sons. No one is to appear before me empty-handed. You are to labor 6 days, but you must rest on the 7th day. You must rest even during plowing and harvesting times. Observe the festival of weeks with the first fruits of the wheat harvest and the festival of ingathering at the turn of the year. 3 times a year, all your males are to appear before Yahweh God, the God of Israel, or excuse me, before the Lord God, the God of Israel, for I will drive out nations before you and enlarge your territory. No one will covet your land when you go up 3 times a year to appear before Yahweh your God. Do not present the blood for my sacrifice with anything leavened. The sacrifice of the Passover festival must not remain until morning. Bring the best first fruits of your land to the house of Yahweh your God. You must not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. Yahweh also said to Moses, write down these words, for I have made a covenant with you and with Israel based on these words. Moses was there with Yahweh 40 days and 40 nights. He did not eat food or drink water. He wrote the 10 Commandments, the words of the covenant, on the tablets. As Moses descended from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hands as he descended the mountain, he did not realize that the skin of his face shone as a result of his speaking with Yahweh. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, the skin of his face shone. They were afraid to come near him, but Moses called out to them. So Aaron and all the leaders of the community returned to him, and Moses spoke to them. Afterward, all the Israelites came near, and he commanded them to do everything Yahweh had told him on Mount Sinai. When Moses had finished speaking with them, he put a veil over his face. But whenever Moses went before Yahweh to speak with him, he would remove the veil until he came out. After he came out, he would tell the Israelites what he had been commanded, and the Israelites would see that Moses' face was radiant. Then Moses would put the veil over his face again until he went to speak with Yahweh. And that is Exodus chapter 34. Again, this seems to be the final fallout, the final resolution that follows the incident of the golden calf. And this is the chapter where the covenant is renewed. Remember, whenever Moses saw what was going on with the golden calf, one of his reactions was that he took the stone tablets and threw them on the ground. He smashed them. We see this in verse number 19 of Exodus chapter 32. Moses became enraged and threw the tablets out of his hands, smashing them at the base of the mountain. Well, now it's time for him to get new tablets, and Yahweh tells him that you are going to get the tablets. You're going to cut 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and I will write on them the words that were on the first tablets which you broke. So it's curious that it says it that way, because here in verse number 1, it says, it seems as if I'm reading this correctly, that Yahweh is the one who's saying that I will write the words that were on the tablets. But once we get to verse number 28, it seems to say that Moses ends up being the one who wrote the commandments, and then the words of the covenant on the tablets. So I'm not sure what to make of that. It does seem to be, it seems to make sense that Moses would be the one doing the writing at this point, since he ruined the first set of tablets, which explicitly said in chapter 31 in verse number 18, when he, being Yahweh, finished speaking with Moses on the Mount Sinai, he, being Yahweh, gave Moses the 2 tablets of the testimony, stone tablets inscribed by the finger of God. So those are the first ones. Well, now here are the second ones. It seems if we take what is recorded here as happening, that Moses wrote the 10 Commandments and the words of the covenant on the tablets. Again, it's a pronoun, he wrote, but the latest person referenced would be Moses. So I'm going to take it to mean that's Moses who wrote this. And again, I think that seems to be his responsibility now, since he broke the first tablets. I could be wrong about that. If you got some thoughts on it, please feel free to leave those in the comment section. But Yahweh calls him up on the mountain, come receive this again. Remember, at this point, the Lord is acting like as if he's done with Israel. Moses has mediated for them. He has pleaded and implored Yahweh that he would receive them again. And Yahweh says, I will. Moses says, will you affirm that by letting me see your glory? That's where we ended in chapter 32 or 33. Now, as we get back to chapter 34, we see Yahweh carrying out what he said he would do. So verse number 5, Yahweh came down in the cloud, stood with Moses there, and proclaimed the name Yahweh, and Yahweh passed in front of him and proclaimed. So this seems to be the carrying out of what we see him saying will take place in chapter 32 and verse number 23. Now, what Yahweh says here is in verse number 6, Yahweh is a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger and abounding in faithful love and truth, abounding in Hesed, this incredible attribute of God, faithful love. Grace is often associated with Hesed as well. He is maintaining faithful love to 1,000 generations, forgiving iniquity, rebellion, and sin. But just because he forgives doesn't mean that the guilty and repentant will not be punished. No, that will take place. Whoever sins will be punished. So it seems to be then that the focus, and this is really tying together chapters 32, 33, and 34 together, is the focus is not so much necessarily on the rebellion of the people, although that is obviously a very key factor in all this. But more so, it seems that the focus is on God's faithfulness to forgive his people and his long-suffering nature toward this covenant people that he has redeemed from Israel, and then the all-important role that Moses is playing in this as well as a mediator and an intercessor for them. So verse number 8 is curious as well. Verse number 8 and 9, because it seems as if Moses is again asking for what God has just said he would grant. But maybe this is similar to what we've seen earlier, where Moses is asking for confirmation. Well, how do I know that this is how you're going to be towards your people? How do I know that things are going to be better than they just were whenever you were so angry with them and ready to just wipe them out? And it seems to be that the confirmation for this is the renewal of the covenant, which is why so much of what is said in verses 10 through 26 is a repeat of what is previously been stated in chapter 23. For the most part, I think most of this is found in chapter 23. Now, something that seems to be new and added to this would be the section of 10 through 16, which specifically talks about not making treaties with the inhabitants of the land of Canaan, not intermarrying with them so that they won't lead you astray. Because twice it says, because Yahweh is jealous for his reputation, you are never to bow down to another God. He is a jealous God. So here, again, God's faithfulness to the covenant is absolute. So they will never have to worry about God running out on them and showing love for another people and abandoning them. So God expects the same. God expects for them to be faithful to him and him alone. Again, putting together the first couple of commandments in the 10 Commandments. You shall have no other gods before me. I am your God alone. And you certainly should not make any carved images to try to represent me. The second seems to be the issue with the golden calf. But if they're going to do that and behave like the pagans in that way, then there certainly would be a need to remind them that you just need to stay away from the pagans. You do not need to allow them to influence you through making treaties or through intermarrying with them. That will only lead you to trouble. And then verses 17 through 26, like I said, are a repeat of chapter 23. A lot was said there, so I'm not going to rehash that once again. But then verse 27, Yahweh said to Moses, write down these words, for I have made a covenant with you and with Israel based on these words. So there is what we said earlier. It seems to be that Moses now is taking on the responsibility to write down these things, since he was responsible for smashing them to begin with. Now, as Moses begins to descend the mountain, there is an effect upon Moses for having been there in the presence of God. Again, I made this point recently, and I think it's a very valid point, that when we are truly in fellowship with Jesus, or when we truly have God's presence with us through his Spirit and such, then we will be changed. That will be made evident to others based upon the type of people that we become. We see that in a very tangible way here with Moses, that he spends time in the presence of Yahweh, and it is very much a tangible thing for others to see, the fact that he had been in the presence of Yahweh, in the fact that his face shone seems to be the idea here would be that he is now truly reflecting God's glory, which is what we should all be doing as imagers of God. We should all be reflecting God's glory in everything that we do. But for the Israelites, they're kind of freaked out by this. They're like, oh man, his face is shining. We don't want to come near him. And yet Moses calls him, says, come on near me. And Moses here takes on a role again where he becomes, and it has already been, and becomes even more this intercessor mediator for Israel to God. In a sense, he becomes the place, he becomes a tabernacle, if I could say it like that. He is the sign of God's presence among them, as he is not only on Sinai, but it seems that whenever he would go into the tent, I believe that's what's being referenced in verse number 33, or excuse me, verse number 34. But whenever Moses went before Yahweh to speak with him, I'm going to assume that's in this tent that is outside of the camp. I'm not positive about that, but I believe that's what's going on here. When every time he would go in, he would lift the veil. That this veil is also mentioned here, which again seems to be another tabernacle reference. It seems the veil or the curtain that would separate the holy from the most holy place, and that would shield them from God's glory. Again, that seems to be something that's going on here. Moses again is acting almost in this tabernacle type of capacity, because they haven't done that yet because of all the issues concerning the golden calf. So whenever he is with Yahweh, he takes off the veil. Whenever he goes out of Yahweh's presence and presents himself for the people, he has to put the veil on so that the glory doesn't shine on the people. Freaks them out, and yet that's the role that he's playing right now. He is the connection point that the people have right now between him, between them and Yahweh. The building of the tabernacle is going to be mentioned in chapter 36, and then what we have coming up here, 35. A lot of what we have in 35, 36, 37, I think through the rest of the book, actually. So the rest of everything going on from this point on, beginning in 35 onward through 40, I believe. Let me double check that. Yes, through 40 is the carrying out of the instructions. Remember, let's try to follow here, if I can even get this right. Remember, Moses, they approach Sinai. The instructions are given. The people stay at the foot. Don't touch the mountain. Stay down there. Some of the leaders are able to go certain distance of the mountain, and then Joshua seems to be able to go a little bit further. And then Moses goes all the way up. He's up there 40 days, 40 nights, receiving instructions, receiving the original 10 Commandments on the tablets and such. He begins to descend at the time of the golden calf, and him and Joshua go down. Moses is very angered by everything that's taking place. He smashes the tablets, and Yahweh's mad. He says, they're done. I'm over them. I'm going to start all over with you. Moses pleads and intercedes for them, and Lord respects that and relents. But there's still going to be punishment here at this point. And the punishment is, you don't get the tabernacle right now. I'm just going to put Moses in this tent outside of the camp, and he is the one who's going to get to have interactions with me. He still acts as if it seems that, then in chapter 35, another part of this is that Yahweh says, I'm not going to go with you. Moses again intercedes for the people and says, no, you have to go with them. If you don't, then we're no different than the rest of the people. You have to go with us. Lord says, okay, I will. Moses says, well, will you confirm this by letting me see your glory? The promise of seeing his glory, just his back, not his face, is seen at the end of chapter 33, 34. The Lord invites Moses to come back up the mountain again, so he can have more interaction with him, and that's where he sees the Lord's glory, it seems. He receives the renewed covenants. He receives these new tablets. Moses then descends the mountain, goes back into the camp. He's got the shining face reflecting Yahweh's glory. And still at this point, there's still no tabernacle, but he serves as that mediating point, it seems, between Yahweh and the people. Now that everything seems to be smoothed over for the most part, now it's time for construction on the instructions that have been given to the people. So that's where we're at this point. Now that things have been smoothed over, now that everybody seems to be on the same page again, now we can begin with the construction process. That's going to begin in chapter 35 that we'll read tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll actually read together chapter 35 and 36, since 35 is a pretty short chapter and even just flows in very well with chapter 36. So we'll be reading that tomorrow. Again, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave those in the comment section. I appreciate so much the comments that people have been leaving. It spurs on good conversation. I appreciate you thinking critically about the text and having these questions that we can discuss and hopefully come to grasp the text even better. Again, looking forward to being with everybody here in just a little bit as we gather for our Bible studies and worship assembly. Looking forward to our young people's study at the house this afternoon. Thanks so much for tuning in, everyone. We'll see you here in a bit. Take care. God bless. Have a great rest of this Lord's day.